Good morning. I'd ask everybody to open up to Exodus chapter 18. That's where I want to start our attention here this morning. Exodus chapter 18, as we begin our discussion, is really good to be with you for one very obvious reason. Number one is the fact that we were not here last week, and that was new to me. I cannot remember. I was trying to think either before or after the virtual service last week of when we've ever canceled on Sunday because of weather. I know we did during COVID. Those are obviously extenuating circumstances, but it literally took entire sections of Texas being shut down for traffic for us not to meet. And so, extraordinary circumstances. Last week, I spoke into a monitor for about an hour and a half, and based on the feedback, everyone was there with me. And so I appreciate your attention. You're rolling with that section for us last week. It wasn't ideal, but obviously it worked out for the best, or it worked out that we had something that we were able to do. That was obviously a good part. Second reason it's good for us to be here is because this is the very beginning this weekend of growth groups. And we've started this brand new this year. It's an opportunity for us as we get bigger, for us to kind of get in each other's homes and get to know each other a little bit more on a different level. And so we study together, we grow together. And so if you're a member here and you don't know what group you've been assigned to, and I say that like you're in detention. You're not in detention, that's not the point. But if you don't know what group you've been assigned to, I would encourage you to ask the elders and deacons and let them know so they can help you out. Also, if you do know, I would encourage everybody here to make an effort to be a part of those. One of the big challenges as churches grow bigger is to really feel like you know each other. When I first started here and we were 35 people, I was able to talk to everybody before services twice. That's no longer the case. And so as we've gotten bigger, it's obviously a challenge for us to get to know each other. It's easier for people to slip through the cracks. We don't want that to happen. As a congregation, we are designed to encourage each other, to grow each other, or to grow with each other. And so we want to make sure we have every opportunity to do that. So make that a priority for all of us as we move into this new year. As I mentioned, last week we were in snow and ice, and it wasn't even a fun snow. Obviously, you can't really do anything in ice except slip and break a hip. So nobody hopefully did that as far as I know. And so because of that, we were all kind of confined into our houses. And you would think after 2 years of COVID, we would have been used to that. I reverted way back into my introvert days where I just didn't really know how to handle anything. And the problem with those types of isolations, in my opinion, is you really learn what your limits are. For instance, we learned just how far what is in our deep freeze could last us. We learned that limit very, very early. We also learned how many different types of sandwiches you could make, so both of those were taught last week. You really learn, I think, a lot about yourself. And oftentimes, opportunities like that allow you to dive deeper into areas maybe that you weren't familiar with. You start to think to yourself, am I as patient of a person as I normally or as I think I am? Am I a happy a person as I normally am? When you're forced to kind of exist with just yourself, you learn those limits very quickly. And I would argue sometimes that can oftentimes go ignored in everyday life. If you look at Exodus chapter 18, this section to me is all about Moses, but to me it's all about Moses kind of not understanding the things that he needed in his life. You look at Exodus chapter 18, starting verse 7, Moses goes out to meet his father-in-law, which is Jethro. He bows down, he kisses him, they ask each other of their welfare, they went to their tent. This is obviously a very friendly greeting. And Moses told his father-in-law, keep in mind all the different itinerary action items that are taking place here. Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh, to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and all the hardship that had befallen them on the journey, and how the Lord had delivered all of them. That's the first 16 chapters. That would have been at least one conversation, if not 24 conversations. Verse 9, Jethro rejoiced over all the goodness which the Lord had done to Israel in delivering them from the hand of the Egyptians. Jethro then, verse 10, said, blessed be the Lord who delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians, from the hand of Pharaoh, and who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Verse 11, now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods. Indeed, it was proven when they dealt proudly against the people. Jethro, verse 12, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering sacrifice for God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law before God. This section is oftentimes used as introductory material to what immediately happens. But if you take a step back and look at all the different things that are taking place in verses 7 through 12, there's quite an action item. For instance, number 1, he tells them in a couple verses about all 10 plagues. He talks about the deliverance through the Red Sea. He talks about the conversations he had with Pharaoh. Those are all huge paradigm-shifting type of things. And as they fast forward to the present, you look in verse 12, and now he is eating with his father-in-law. He's also eating with all the elders of Israel. He's eating with essentially the leadership group of a tally that would be close to 2.5 million people. And if you look at from Jethro's perspective, as he's looking at his son-in-law, he's thinking to himself, wow, you've done quite well for yourself. I don't know if I anticipated all of this, Jethro would think, as he marries his daughter, but Moses has done quite a bit. He's been very busy. But there's a problem as Jethro analyzes the situation. In verse 13, it says, it came about the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the two people stood about Moses from the morning until the evening. Now when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, what is this thing that you are doing for these people? Why do you alone sit as judge, and all the people stand about you from morning until evening? You're essentially the bottleneck for everything. And Moses said to his father-in-law, because the people come to me to inquire of God, and when they have a dispute, it comes to me, and I judge between a man and his neighbor and make known the statutes of God and his laws. That is a monumental undertaking. We have 3 elders for 120 people. Can you imagine being the one guy that's solving every dispute known to man, from the biggest issues that you have with these issues about the law and the nuances of sacrifice and all these different things, and then you're also arguing between property disputes and who took whose sheep? Like, that's the spectrum that we're dealing with here. And as Jethro is observing this, he's seeing the long Black Friday-esque lines that extend out of Moses' tent. He's thinking to himself, this is not conducive to long-term health. Jethro has a better option. Verse 17. He says to him, the thing that you are not doing, or you're doing, is not good. Here's the warning, verse 18. You're going to wear yourself out. Both yourself and these people who are with you, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. Now, Jethro is worried, I would argue, about his physical and mental, emotional state. I think all of those are in play. But what Jethro understands, I would argue better than anybody, and certainly better than Moses at this point, is that if he continues down this path, Moses is going to reach a point where he is utterly worthless to everybody. Not because he's not a great guy, but because he physically cannot go any further. Verse 19, listen to me, Jethro says, I'm going to give you counsel. God be with you. You're going to be the people's representatives before God. You're going to bring the disputes to God. And then you're going to also, verse 20, teach them the statutes and the laws, to make known to them the way in which they're to walk and the work which they are to do. You're going to get some help, Jethro says. I'm going to allow you, or I'm going to suggest to you, that you embolden other people that can handle some of these disputes. And the things that you are dealing with at your level are really only the things that ascend up to this. Those are the major issues that nobody can discuss. You're going to take 1,000 disputes a day, you're going to put it to like maybe 5 or 10. That's the way in which you're going to provide long-term benefit towards these people. What Jethro essentially tells him in this instance is, you need to know your limits. And if I were to ask everyone to raise their hand at this point and say, how many times has somebody come up to you and said, you need to learn your limits? Probably everybody in this room at a point in their life has been told this exact same thing. Because there's an issue, I don't think just with modern America, although I certainly think it's heightened because of these things. But there's an issue with people just in general where we kind of push and push and push until we don't realize that we can't push any longer. And whether that's in an academic arena, whether that's in a career arena, whether that's in a physical arena, eventually somebody comes to us at some point and says, look, you need to take a break because you don't realize how hard you're pushing yourself. And you don't realize what pushing yourself too hard is going to do to you. Jethro helps Moses, when he can't even see it himself, learn his limits, and then he finally reaches those limits. Look in Numbers, the 11th chapter. This is a long-term growth process. I'm sure there's some kind of new age buzzword for this. I don't know exactly what it is, but he's starting to reach his limit. Look at Numbers, the 11th chapter, starting verse 10. It says, when Moses heard the people weeping, notice the emotional component that Moses is dealing with here. Numbers chapter 11, verse 10, Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, each man at the door of his tent, and the anger of the Lord was kindled greatly, and Moses was displeased. Moses said to the Lord, why have you been so hard on your servant? Why have I not found favor in your sight that you have laid the burden of all this people on me? Was it I, after all, verse 12, who conceived all this people? Was it I who brought them forth, that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries a nursing infant, to the land which you swore to their fathers? Where am I to get meat? Verse 13. To give to all these people, for they weep before me, saying, give us meat that we may eat. I alone, verse 14, am not able to carry all this people because it is too burdensome for me. Do you notice how he's parroting what Jethro had said? And keep in mind that this is very early. If you go 2 chapters from now, that's where they're at the entrance to Canaan with the spies and all that thing. So you are not too many months removed from Jethro. And Jethro's advice to have all these different people to help you do these different things, Moses seems to have taken to heart, because now he's parroting these exact same statements to God. I cannot handle this. Now Moses needs a perspective shift. It's not about him. But he says to God, I cannot do this. In verse 15, if you're going to deal this way with me, just kill me at once, for I have found favor in your sight, and do not let me see my wretchedness. I cannot do this any further, Moses says. Numbers chapter 20. 40 years now into the future. 40 years into the future. And there are all sorts of things, I would argue, that have bubbled up over in Moses' life where he's dealt with this issue, he's dealt with that issue. You look at Numbers 13, he's dealt with the 12 spies, 10 of which were not faithful. You go back to Numbers chapter 16, you have Korah's rebellion with Dathan and Abiram. There are all sorts of challenges to his own status that have probably tested him. In Numbers chapter 20, starting verse 1, arguably the biggest one that is yet to face him in verse 1. The sons of Israel, the whole congregation, came to the wilderness of Zin in the first month. That's at the doorstep into Canaan. The people stayed at Kadesh, and Miriam died and was buried. Miriam is one of 3 people that understand exactly what Moses is going through. And in less than 7 words, Miriam's death happens and is over with. And then you have another complaint in verse 12, which I think there's 15 or 16, depending on how you count them in the scriptures. Verse 2, there was no water for the congregation. They assembled themselves against Moses and Aaron. The people thus contended with Moses and spoke, saying, if only we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why then have you brought the Lord's assembly into this wilderness for us and our beasts to die here? Why have you made us come up from Egypt to bring us into this wretched place? It is not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates. There's not even water to drink. Now this is after they've kind of moved around Edom. They realize that they can't go straight through Edom. They've got to go around. So it delays the process any longer. Verse 6, Moses and Aaron came in from the presence of the assembly to the door of the tent of meeting, and they fell on their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I'm going to solve this for you real quick. Take the rod, and you and your brother assemble the congregation, and speak to the rock before their eyes, that they may yield its water. And you shall thus bring forth water for them out of the rock, and let the congregation and their beasts drink. If you stop the story at this point, everything is fine. Because Moses, back in Exodus chapter 18, begins this awakening where he realizes that there's a limit to what he personally can do for the people of Israel. He's only human. Numbers chapter 11, he realizes that that's that limit. And so he cries out towards God. God helps him. He has this whole exchange. You get to Numbers chapter 20, he's following along the same path. He cries out to God in humility. And then he pushes a little bit past it. Look in verse 9. Moses took the rod from before the Lord just as he commanded him, and Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly from the rock, and he said to them the most unfortunate phrase in Moses' vocabulary, listen now, you rebels, shall we bring forth water for you out of this rock? Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice. Keep in mind, the first time he was supposed to strike the rock with the waters of Massa and Meribah, once. He hits it twice. The second time was probably more violent than the second. And water came forth abundantly in the congregation, and their beasts drank. Moses is not handling leadership well. And at this point in his life, not only has his sister died, not only is he dealing with complaint number 16, but then he erupts in verse 10 by saying, shall we bring forth water from you out of this rock? And then he hits the rock once, he hits it twice in pure visceral anger. We have a word for this in today's vocabulary. That word is burnout. And when you look at that phrase, oftentimes we talk about modern day vernacular and we say, well, this is somebody who's really, really tired. It's somebody who maybe has pushed a little too far, and so they need to go on a sabbatical and they need to take a little break. They're done. Emotionally, physically, mentally, they're just done. For Moses, it wasn't just that he was done. His burnout forced him, or his burnout rather led to him, I don't want to speak out about inevitabilities, his burnout led him to do something that he would not have done otherwise. And that's why burnout, I think, is such a big issue for so many of us in today's world. Whether you're talking about it from a physical perspective, that's a conversation for another time, or you're dealing with it in a spiritual perspective because you've been a Christian for 40 plus years and you think to yourself, I can't hold on a moment longer. And before long, you begin to say things that you shouldn't say. You begin to be the type of husband that you shouldn't be. You begin to be the type of elder, deacon, preacher that you shouldn't be. Type of son you shouldn't be. Because the anger has reached a point, the exhaustion has reached a point to your life that you are saying and doing things that you, quite frankly, shouldn't do and say. And the hardship of it is, as we talk about with Moses in Exodus chapter 18, is oftentimes we don't even recognize these symptoms within ourselves. See if any of these sound familiar to anybody in this room. And if they are familiar, please don't raise your hand. I want us to internalize this. Don't lash out at me either. That would be literally the opposite of what we're talking about here. Burnout is oftentimes typified by things like overreactive anger, where a symptom or a situation that takes place and I just completely fly off the handle because of whatever my issue is with it. It's a small issue, and so I magnify it 1,000 times. That's usually a symptom of burnout. I have no emotional reaction, the opposite side of the equation. I don't care about you. I don't care about the situation. I don't care about anything. I am done. And it doesn't matter to me if we live, die. It doesn't matter if this business fails, it succeeds. It doesn't matter even, I would argue, if I become a Christian, don't become a Christian. I don't care anymore because I'm done. Number 3, decreased joy. Things that used to give me joy, I just don't care about them anymore. The situation that I used to love, and I used to wake up on Sundays and go to the assembly and sing louder than anybody else in the room, I just don't want to be there anymore. Number 4, overly cynical. Now, I'm a cynical person by nature. That's just who I am. But there can come a point where I start to criticize everything. And I start to look at this situation, that situation, and say, well, all this type of stuff is just wrong and it's terrible, and if I were in charge, I would do it. I have a tendency to be that way. It's usually a symptom of burnout, a hidden symptom. Or it's especially apropos for Christians is when we start to get in the realm of hopelessness and or uselessness. The feeling that there's really nothing I can do because it doesn't matter. After all, what's done is done, and what's happening is happening, and I can't control it one way or the other. So why should I even be involved to begin with? I want to tell you something right now, ladies and gentlemen, that this is not how God created us to be. And before you start throwing apples at me and saying, well, this is a sermon, this isn't a pep talk at a culture luncheon or whatever it is, it's not really what I'm getting at. The point with me talking about burnout in a spiritual sense is not to say that you need to dial it back at work. That's not really the point that I'm getting at. The point that I'm getting at when we talk about spiritual burnout is the reality of understanding what's our responsibility and what's not our responsibility. Levi read from Matthew chapter 11. I want to take us back there. Usually when you research the idea of burnout, eventually you end up in Matthew chapter 11, verses 27 through 30. I want to take your attention there. Matthew 11, starting in verse 28, rather. And this is a great verse. If you need to meditate on this one, you need to think about it. Matthew chapter 11, starting in verse 28. Jesus says to the audience in front of him, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble of heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." If you want to pluck that section out of Scripture and just take it, I have no problem with that. Because at the very least, if you spend your time meditating on these principles, what that creates within us is a sense of humility. I can't do everything. I'm not designed to do everything. And so I'm going to give it all over to God. That's not fully the point that God is getting at. You jump back to verse 20 in Matthew chapter 11. It says, Jesus began to denounce the cities in which most of his miracles were done because they didn't repent. And he says to them, "Woe to you, Chorazin, woe to you, Bethsaida, for if the miracles that occurred in Tyre and Sidon, which had occurred in you, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. Nevertheless," verse 22, "I say to you, it will be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon on the day of judgment than for you. And you, Capernaum," verse 23, will not be exalted to heaven, will you? You will descend to Hades, for if the miracles that occurred in Sodom, which occurred in you, it will remain to this day. Nevertheless, verse 24, "I say to you that it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom in the day of judgment than for you." Why is Jesus so critical of these people? There are few occasions where Jesus becomes, and I don't want to say this in a disrespectful way, but he seems almost borderline unhinged with his criticism of people. And this is one of them. Because not only does he say you guys are condemned essentially because of your attitude, but he even compares them to Sodom and Gomorrah and saying those guys would have done 10 times better than you. Why is he so critical to them? It's because as you look at what he says, especially there about the miracles, he says those people at least had their eyes open. They would have seen the miracles and they would have reacted. You guys do not. I'm literally raising people from the dead. And you are as unemotional and cynical as you possibly could be. Verse 25, Jesus says, "I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise, the so-called intelligent, the ones who think they know everything, and you have revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, for this way was well-pleasing in your sight. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, nor does anyone know the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wills to reveal him. So-called experts, people that think they know better, the people that look at situations and say, well, there's no way that this could possibly be, because after all, this doesn't align with Scripture. This doesn't align with our interpretation of the Torah. Jesus says, I'm so glad that those aren't the people listening to this right now, because those people would have written it off. Instead, what he's looking for are people that are humble, people that are hungry, people that still have hope, people that are able to look at the situation and say very simply, I need salvation. God created us to be humble. He created us to be dependent on Him. He did not create us to take the world on our shoulders like Atlas and think that we can solve every problem. The problem is that society has forced us to become something that we're not. The standard argument you can make about cell phone usage and things that kind of distract us and how busy and how filled the world is. And every time you talk to somebody, it seems like this day, you ask them how they're doing and they say, well, I'm really tired. Well, why are you so tired? Well, because I'm really busy. Everybody's busy. Everybody's tired. The average American in a 16-hour day where they're awake checks their phone 186 times a day. 70% of working Americans have voluntarily offered that they willingly check and respond to work emails after hours. Now, I understand that I'm on call 24/7. That's a little bit of a different scenario. I say that, and it sounds so hypocritical for me to even bring that up. But we wonder then, after all of that, where we willingly indulge ourselves, where we willingly make ourselves available, where we're always connected, where we're always on, where we're always responsible for something, we wonder why we are so exhausted. When you look in the Old Testament, I understand that we're not Old Testament people. But I think you can glean a lot from what is obviously mentioned in the pages of Scripture. When you look at the pages of the Old Testament, I think it's very interesting that God codified rest to the point that if you don't take it, it can be single-handedly responsible for your downfall. Jeremiah chapter 17, starting verse 19. The seriousness with which he makes the Sabbath, I think, is very telling. Because it's very easy, as we discussed 3 or 4 weeks ago in our class on Amos especially, to just kind of push through it. Just say, when can we get services over? When can we get this over so we can get back to making a little money? Jeremiah chapter 17, starting in verse 19. By the way, this comes on the heels of the Your Heart is Wicked sermon that we did a couple weeks ago. The Lord said to me, verse 19, go and stand in the public gate through which the kings of Judah come in and go out, as well as all the gates of Jerusalem, and say to them, listen to the word of the Lord, kings of Judah, all inhabitants of Jerusalem who come in through these gates. This says the Lord, verse 21, take heed for yourselves. I'm going to stand here and say this to everybody. Take heed for yourselves. Don't carry any load on the Sabbath. Don't bring anything in through the gates of Jerusalem. You shall not bring a load out of your houses on the Sabbath day, nor do any work, but keep the Sabbath day holy, as I commanded your forefathers. In verse 23, yet they didn't listen or incline their ears, but stiffened their necks in order to not listen or take correction. The obvious question is, why is anybody working through their lunch break? I know Sabbath isn't a lunch break. That's not exactly what I'm talking about here. But why are people willingly foregoing a mandated day of rest? You tell me, why do people work on Saturday nights? Why do some people wake up Sunday morning, the very first thing they check is their phone to see what they need to respond to at work? Why do some people text constantly, nonstop about business matters when their family's playing Monopoly in the next room? Why do we do that to ourselves? When you look at verse 24, it will come about, verse 24, if you listen attentively to me, declares the Lord, to bring no load in through the gates of the city on the Sabbath day, but to keep the Sabbath day holy by doing no work on it, then there will come in through the gates of this city kings and princes sitting on the throne of David, riding in chariots and on horses, they and their princes, the men of Judah, the inhabitants of Jerusalem. This city will be inhabited forever. They will come in from the cities of Judah. If you just take the Sabbath from the environs of Jerusalem, from the land of Benjamin, from the lowland, from the hill country, from the Negev, bringing burnt offerings, sacrifices, grain offerings, incense, bringing sacrifice of thanksgiving to the house of the Lord. But if you do not listen to me, verse 27, to keep the Sabbath day holy, by not carrying a load, and by coming in through the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, then I will kindle a fire in its gates, and I will devour the palaces of Jerusalem, and they will not be quenched. The Sabbath in the Old Testament was not just about keeping law. That's how the Pharisees wanted to interpret it. Can't believe you guys are mandating how many steps you can take on the Sabbath. That defeats the point entirely. For the Old Testament people, the Sabbath was an opportunity for you to cease labor and A, spend time with your family, and B, lead that family as you think and meditate upon God. And the reason he says this in Jeremiah chapter 17 is if you willingly push past that and be consumed 24/7 with non-spiritual matters, you will drift from God, your family will drift from God, and the nation will drift from God. Now, am I mandating a Sabbath for any of us? No, I don't have that power. It's not authorized. That's not the point entirely. But we can take a lesson from the fact that God built restoration and meditation on God's Word into the law and mandated it to the point that Jeremiah chapter 17 makes it the primary reason that these people drifted away from Him. Let's be real here. The problem with Moses, if you go back to Exodus chapter 18, was not that he was checking his phone every 5 minutes. He didn't have that. If he did, he would have an iPhone. We all know this. That's not the argument that we're making here. It wasn't that he was checking his phone. The problem with Moses, and this is something that all of us struggle with, I would argue on some level, is that he could not separate his work from his life. You talk to people today and you ask them, who are you? You say, what do you define you? 99 times out of 100, you'll get a work-related response. Well, I'm an architect, I'm an engineer, I'm a writer, I'm whatever it is that I am. That's what I do. I think it's interesting that God does not define work in that sense in Scripture. Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Could literally talk about this for hours. I love Ecclesiastes. One of these days I'm going to just get up here and read it, and we're just going to discuss it. I'm not going to do that today, obviously. Ecclesiastes chapter 5. There's a lot of cynicism in Solomon's words in Ecclesiastes. But listen to what he has to say here. He says, here's what I have seen in all my wisdom, all my knowledge, all my resources. Here's what I've seen to be good and fitting, to eat, to drink, to enjoy oneself in all one's labor in which he toils under the sun during the few years of life which God has given him, for this is his reward. Furthermore, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he has also empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. He will not often consider the years of his life because God keeps him occupied with the gladness of his heart. There's a dual notion in those verses. Number one, the realization that the blessings that you have day by day is your reward from God. And number two, I think very interestingly, he talks about the capacity to enjoy them. We don't always consider your blessings. We don't always take the time to really meditate and be thankful for the things that we have in our life. Ecclesiastes chapter 6 and verse 1, there's an evil which I've seen under the sun, and it is prevalent among men. It was an issue then, it's an issue now. A man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that his soul lacks nothing of all that he desires. This is the most blessed individual in the entire world, and yet God has not empowered him to eat from them, for a foreigner enjoys them. This is vanity, and it's a severe affliction. Verse 3, if a man fathers 100 children, and he lives many years, however many they may be, but his soul is not satisfied with good things, and he doesn't even have a proper burial, then I say it's better than a miscarriage than he. For it comes in futility, goes in obscurity, and its name is covered in obscurity. It never sees the sun, it never knows anything. It is better off than he. Even if the other man lives 1,000 years twice, and doesn't enjoy good things, then not all go to one place. All a man's labor is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not satisfied. There's a capacity that we as human beings, much less Christians, especially as Christians with an eternal mindset, that we need to understand. We sing songs all day long about count your many blessings, name them one. When was the last time you did that? When was the last time I looked at my life and separated what I do from who I actually am as a human? As he mentions there in Ecclesiastes chapter 6, if you're somebody who has all the blessings in the world and you don't have the perspective to enjoy them, it's probably better that we were never even here, because it's a less depressing type of thing. I read verse 7 specifically because I like what he says here in verse 7. All man's labor is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not satisfied. Go a couple more verses. What advantage does the wise man have over the fool? What advantage does the poor man have, knowing how to walk before the living? What the eyes see is better than what the soul desires. This too is futility and striving after wind. Modern day interpretation of this is the eyes are bigger than your stomach. What we see and what we want, that's always better to us than what we have. And yet God says the ability to be happy with what you have is what's really important. God viewed work, what you do in the farm, what you do at your office. He viewed that as just that work. Your life was with your family, was with God. That's what he really isolated. And so as we're thinking about this notion of burnout, what it means to really be burnout, I would ask us all three questions, and I'll go through these very quickly. Number one, is the pace that you're operating at now sustainable? It may be because you're 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years old that you think that I'm just going to truck along like this forever. Is that really the pace by which you think you can live your life? Is that sustainable for the long run? Number two, are your priorities neglected? The things that really matter, are those taking a back seat? And you can talk about family obviously here, but you can also argue your spiritual life. Am I sacrificing my soul at the altar of a promotion? At the altar of a hobby? What is it that I'm neglecting to consume my life with worry? Number three, what are you going to work on next? We always think to ourselves, if we attain to a certain level in life, that that's going to be the end-all and be-all of my happiness level, and that's going to be everything that I ever need. And when the reality is that anybody who has this issue, anybody who is burned out, anybody who's pushed into the end of that candle, you're going to reach that at some point. And if that's not enough for you, what are you going to work on next? What is that pursuit of your life? 1973, there was a man named Ed Catmull. And Ed Catmull moved to Hollywood because he had dreams of being an artist. He was an animation designer, and he loved everything about it. And his dream, as he states it in his biography, was to develop the world's first animated film that won an Oscar. He loved animation, was a fierce devotee of Walt Disney. And so he moved to LA with the single-minded goal of developing the first Oscar-winning animated film. And he essentially did that because he was the principal designer on a movie called Toy Story. After Toy Story came out and he went through the press releases and all the tours and everything like that, he looked back at his life, and what he realized was that he was completely and utterly empty because for 20 plus years of his life, his work and his single-minded goal had defined him. He woke up after all it was over and he didn't really know what to do with his life because he was defined by something that was temporary, something that was external. And he's the one that actually asked that question in his biography, what am I going to work on next? And so I'll ask you that question. For somebody who's consumed by this, for somebody who's consumed by work and by pushing 1,000%, what are you going to work on next? What's the thing that will satisfy you? Because I'm here to tell you right now, even for somebody like me who hasn't necessarily reached all the different apexes of life that this world has to offer, the most satisfying thing any of us can have is a life with God, who gives to us, as he talks about, freely, abundantly, who asks us to come to him, all who are weary and heavy laden, because only he can give us rest. And so if you're here this morning and you haven't found that, I would encourage you to find it. Help us. We'll help you as we stand and as we sing.